Welcome to Questions We're Afraid to Ask. All right, welcome back, everybody. We are here again with another question. Real simple, short and sweet. Who decides our history? So we're going to jump in and talk a little bit about archaeology today, and some of the things that we've been seeing coming up, and some of the potential changes that we think may need to be made. And so before I do that, and something I didn't want to do is like speak for the archaeologists. And so what I want to read is I'm going to read a chunk out of the open letter that came from the Society for American Archaeology that was written to Netflix about Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse documentary. So I'm just going to read this paragraph here. So after more than a century of professional archaeological investigation, we find no archaeological evidence to support the existence of an advanced global Ice Age civilization of the kind Hancock suggests. Archaeologists have investigated hundreds of Ice Age sites and published the results in rigorously reviewed journals. The assertion that Ancient Apocalypse is a factual docuseries or documentary rather than entertainment with ideological goals is preposterous. If there were any credible evidence for a global Ice Age civilization of the kind Hancock suggests, archaeologists would investigate it and report their findings with rigor according to the scientific methods, practices, and theories of our discipline. If the evidence warranted scientific peer review, we would acquire funding to test it, publish our results, and promote it in our own outreach materials. Contrary to Hancock's claims, archaeology does not willfully ignore credible evidence, nor does it seek to suppress it in a conspiratorial fashion. And it goes on. It's online if you want to read it. But it really is very much there is no evidence to support this, so therefore we don't have to address it. And I don't think that's the case anymore.
And even if we haven't found any evidence yet, and let's just say there's not any, why should we not have a discussion about the possibility of something that might have existed? Because we know lots of history is just lost and destroyed and wiped out, right? The rarity of something like a Pompeii, where a volcano buries an entire town and preserves it, is so statistically improbable that Pompeii probably shouldn't exist, right? As well preserved as it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, and archaeology, I don't say this to offend any archaeologists, archaeology is a science that's still figuring itself out. And maturing. And what do I mean by that? Well, we started with a bunch of Europeans, mostly Englishmen, but not all, some Germans and others, who decided to go raid Egypt of all its treasures, right? They were treasure hunters, or they were explorers, or they were adventurers. And they would take notes, and it has developed in lurches and leaps and, all of that kind of stuff. Not to say that there's not scientific method applied to archaeology. There is today, but it's still maturing, and we're still finding stuff.
And I want to tag on the Egypt thing, because that's something that I've watched some documentaries. My son is big into Egypt, and so every time he gets a chance to do a report, we're like, let's pick an Egyptian thing and research that because he's interested in it. And so what I find interesting and have sort of been pondering on for a while is the idea that the British came into Egypt not really knowing what it was, when they came in there, and just sort of dug everything up and just sort of decided what the story of Egypt was, disregarding some of the things that the people in Egypt were saying. Just well, no, but our story is that, while yes, we did, we built the pyramids, it wasn't our technology. We learned how to do it from someone else. And they're like, well, that's myth. We've just decided that's myth. Just the same as we ignore the King's Lists. The King's Lists are true up until the flood, But because the numbers before the flood are like kings who lived for 34,000 years, clearly it's not true and
It's
we
not
just
real.
disregard it. And that's one of the big things that I keep kicking around is that how arrogant that is. Like
And
to just go, well, clearly because that doesn't make sense to me, it can't be true.
and another thing I want to point out with Egypt specifically, because I've studied some ancient languages in translation. We always say, oh, it's the Rosetta Stone because that's what let us understand our the
Hmm.
hieroglyphs. However, the Rosetta Stone is not a perfect match, and it doesn't apply to all the pictograms and
Right.
hieroglyphics. So we're making assumptions there. There's stuff painted on
Hmm.
the wall. We have no idea what it means, and we're having to leap to conclusions. And it's it's a document and a document and a document, but we
Hmm.
don't have the whole last bit of the document, so we can't even translate the whole thing perfectly. And even when you go from language to language, you lose stuff. So there's
Yes.
a lot there. Um, and a lot of these things we don't even know. Even records we have, we don't know how the words were said. These languages are dead. They're dead for a reason. That's because nobody speaks them nowadays, and we have to make assumptions. Uh, and that's a huge part of archaeology is taking fragments
Hmm.
and piecing it together and making a logical assumption. So why not have another hypothesis?
Yeah.
And
Well,
why
so
not talk
here's,
about it? That's the question, right? For me, is like,
yeah.
why is it
Why?
so
Well, I mean,
taboo to talk about?
think about how long, talking about Graham, he's been trying to get someone to debate him.
Yeah,
Like, I want someone to challenge my ideas. I think I can defend them. So I would like someone to step up and challenge me on this. And so, but I was gonna, I lost where I was going with that. But there's definitely something to that about being willing to defend your thing. And oh, I was gonna say, so looking at this and saying like, okay, because I just recently heard Graham Hancock talking about how he now believes that the pyramid was built by the Egyptians during the Egyptian time, which I
hmm
think is sort of a newer shift in that idea, and it's based on like all the shafts in the four shafts coming, the two out of the king's chamber and the two out of the queen's chamber, actually point to stars that line up appropriately
for
for the
that time frame.
time during the Egyptian times. And so, like, again, let's take the leap. Let's give it back to the Egyptians. Say, okay, the Egyptians built it. Okay. But they tell us that the tools that they had to do it with were not theirs, and those are gone. And we don't have
And
any evidence of them. Oh, well, hang on. And so, what that tells us is that even at 3,000 years ago, if they were using, we'll just call them magic because it's tech beyond our understanding, we'll just call them magic tools.
hmm
Well, where are they? If they're gone and they're missing, and that's only 3,000 years ago, and we still can't prove how we even built them, then when we go back 10 and 15 and 20, and you're like, we're certain. We're not even certain for when how the pyramids were built. So how can you be certain farther back?
absolutely. And I'm a big fan of experimental archaeology, right? The let's
Mm-hmm.
try and do it. And there was a documentary that I watched not long ago about Stonehenge and how they could move the stones. And they did their best to build a boat of the time frame they think Stonehenge was created, of the technology they have, because they have found boats from about then buried in rivers and mud. And yes, they had to make some modern sacrifices, like because of the time frame they had to do it, like using drills, electric drills and stuff. But they got as close as they could, and they proved they could move the stone that way. They proved they could load it using nothing but sticks and rope and levers and pull, basic lever and pulley type stuff. So they proved it was possible. Do we know if that's how they did it? No, but we at least know it was feasibly possible.
Mm-hmm.
They have yet to cut a block as big as the ones that are on the pyramid, build a ramp, say 300 feet long, to a platform, and roll it up on sticks with people.
Yeah.
And until I see somebody do that, I have trouble believing it's possible.
Well, and even like take a step back from the pyramid and just look at some of like the trilithon underneath. It's underneath the, oh, I want to say it's the starts with the P, Parthenon. That might be right. But there's three giant blocks that are underneath this, temple. I think
Mhm.
it's Temple to Zeus or something like that above it. But like those are even bigger than any of the blocks that are in the pyramid. And look at the unfinished obelisk in the Aswan Quarry. Like that's a whole
Mhm.
nother thing. I mean, that thing's 12, I think they said it's going to be 12,000 tons or something like that, or 1,200 tons. I mean, it's just bananas. And they were going to just move it. And
Yeah.
how?
And how? And and this also comes into like, when do we update the books? Because
Right.
one of the things that has been a pet peeve of mine is we now know for a fact that humans were in North America well before the 10,000 year ice age, which is what I was
Yeah.
taught and was what was in the textbook when my 18-year-old was in elementary and junior high. And I was gonna harp on that in this one, but in doing a little bit of digging, I found, well, there's new published data. The earliest I've seen it is from 2016 that now says humans arrived here between 15 and 30,000 years ago. So I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, it is finally beginning to make it into the reference books. But I don't know if it's in all of them. I don't know if it's being taught everywhere. And when I say we know that for sure, well, the Galt site right up the road in Florence, Texas, has stuff that's way older than 10,000 years ago, and there are
13 to
others.
16, I think.
13 to 18 to 16,
13,
depending
18.
on
Yeah.
which website I've checked. And we're still hoping to have someone from there on at some point to talk about it. But it's not the only one. And I was just reading about um, a site they found, I think it was in Oregon, where they found scrapers and camel teeth and things, and they dated that back to 18,500 years ago because it was buried under Mount St. Helens erupted ash, and they carbon dated the stuff, and it was way older than they thought it
Yeah.
was, and they know the eruption was 15,000 years ago. So, right, you know,
There is
um,
there is substantial evidence that there is more. I mean, don't even start with Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe and all
and
the
all the
other 10 or
others.
15 sites that they found there that are all 11,000 years old. They were all intentionally buried like a time capsule. But I mean, regardless, something that you look at someone like Carl Sagan, Neil deGrasse Tyson, um, sort of figureheads of science
Yes.
that sort of present these things to us. It occurs to me we don't really have a figurehead of history. There's not like an authority.
We don't have a real life Dr. Jones,
Yeah. But and
right?
I wonder if that's because when we talk about like when we think about Carl Sagan, they're really focused on planets and space and astrophysics and stuff, and it's a very narrow. I guess it's a
Well,
narrow enough field that enough people are interested in that we want an authority, and so. But I think the other side is history is so big that
mhm.
you don't really have one person who understands all of it. And so you
well,
have to defer to the authority
I think
on that.
it's also rare to find someone academically inclined enough and eloquent enough and
Mm-hmm.
good enough at bringing these ideas to the layman. That's an interesting mix, right?
It is.
And charismatic enough to pay attention to and not fall asleep to. Because I've had
Right.
history professors that knew their stuff inside and out, but my God, staying awake in their class was just a nightmare.
Yeah. Well, and
Um,
and what's interesting is even though he's labeled, all of the terrible things he is, Graham sort of is one of those people because but he's not a historian. He's more of a journalist,
he's a
but he
journalist. He says he
does,
is.
he
Yeah.
does have the gift of gab. He does know how to present his story
Yes.
eloquently and
Absolutely.
present it. the problem is that you get the amateur steps in and says, I have an opinion.
Yeah.
And then some authority person just goes, no, sorry,
And
we don't agree with you. And that's just sort of supposed to be it,
we also
you
have to
know?
address the fact that there is an institutional conservatism, which I think is not unjust in academia. We have these ideas, we have money tied to these ideas, we have reputation tied to these ideas, we have
Mm-hmm.
prestige based on these ideas, we sell books based on these ideas, and we need strong evidence to challenge these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
The issue I'm struggling with is it feels like we've found some of that strong evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than talk about it, it's just like, well, that's just an anomaly, so we're not going to.
Or you do something like they did with when they first sort of got started with Göbekli Tepe, which is still sort of the plan is, well, it was only hunter gatherers then. Hey, look at this. Huh, I guess hunter gatherers could do that. Hang on a minute. You don't just get to change the definition of hunter gatherer because we found megaliths. That's not how that
Or
works.
or we have to come up with an entirely new paradigm for how culture worked, because
Yeah.
that is a whether it was nomadic peoples who did some hunting and gathering, there is, you have to admit, now there is a significantly more advanced culture. They had
Mm-hmm.
more calories to spend than we thought they did for free time to carve that kind of thing, and it takes a lot of time and commitment. And
Mm-hmm.
we're not digging into, and no pun intended, and addressing that, right?
Well, there's also a piece to this. So let's set up the timeline on this just a little bit. We're talking about the younger dryads going from 12.8 to 11.6. So 12,800 years to 11,600 years. We go from coming out of the ice age, we get the hard ice spike drop in temperature, it starts to rise, and it starts to rise up a little bit, and then there's a big spike at the end that sort of warms it back up, and so you sort of this big drop and back up again. It kind of levels off.
Levels off.
The could have been an asteroid, could have been a solar flare, could have been a volcano. It doesn't really matter at this
Could have
point.
been
There was a
aliens. We don't know. We
who
don't know.
it doesn't matter. All we know is around 1,000 years of massive climate change, turmoil. We know there was population drops. All the North American megafauna died. There
Mm-hmm.
were huge, we presumably gigantic floods. I think Randall Carlson's probably right. There was a big flood down the whole western side of the country.
Yeah.
Um, but what we get at the end of that is Göbekli Tepe. We know
Mm-hmm.
that it's at the end of that period. That's when it was buried. It was probably built right around that same time and then buried up pretty quickly. That just doesn't come out of magic. So
Yeah.
if we're saying that before the 1,000 years of turmoil, they were just hunter gatherers, then how at the end of that terrible time of everybody dying and it being cold, and did we suddenly just like magically figure out how to do incredibly complicated things that we didn't know how to do, like carving stones and rising them and doing high relief stuff, and there's alignments to start. I mean, it doesn't just happen out of nowhere. So there has to be a knowledge base that's built on, which means
Mm-hmm.
there had to have been something before. And I feel like, and I pull this just from nowhere, I feel like one of the biggest pieces of resistance to this has to be the fact that this is going to break religion. Like if you
Yeah.
say that we came out of a shamanic religion, antediluvian religion, and then we came out of that turmoil. That's why there's so much common. You see so many threads of commonality between South American cultures and Chinese cultures and Native Americans and Africa and Europe. And there's weird connections everywhere where you're like, why do they both have the same story? That's
And
kind of weird. And then some cultures share. Everybody's got a flood myth, so that's got
and
to mean something.
we also haven't even touched on the idea that we may need to rethink when we started being human, not Homo
Mhm.
sapien, but human and technological development in general, because we know there are hominids that are on islands that never touched land,
Mhm.
and they had to cross deep water to get there.
Right.
And that question is, as far as I know, being not in the field, is not even being talked about.
Yeah.
The other question I have, and this gets into some of the difficulties of archaeology in the United States and Canada specifically. And this is difficult for me because I have some Native American heritage in me too, so I understand where they're coming from. There was the 1990 Native American Reparations Act, where we're supposed to give everything back, and when we find stuff, we're supposed to, my understanding of it is we're not supposed to dig in what could be considered sacred, burial, tribal land, historically tribal land, and there's, unless we find something when we're building a building or something like that,
Hmm.
then archaeology in the United States is hard to do. So we can't dig really deep, right? And I'm
And
talking about
sometimes.
literally digging deep into the ground. And which brings me to an interesting question. Because if the theory is we got over here from the ice bridge, fine. We also know that ice bridge has happened many, many, many times over the millennia. And we know that it's in our hominid nature to spread out. Why did, if they lived for hundreds of thousands of years, like we say they did, why did
Mhm.
Homo erectus never make it over here? Or have they, and we just haven't found the bones yet? Because again, we got to get lucky to find the bones. Let's just be honest,
Mhm.
right? What is it? 1% of 1% of stuff gets fossilized.
So what it is it's 1% of every, is it creature or species? I think it's 1% of every species is preserved, and we find 1% of that. I
That,
think that's
yeah.
the number.
So it is
But it's
entirely within the
nothing.
realm of possibility, entirely within the realm of possibility that we had hominids of some kind running up and down North and South America for tens of thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands of years. We just
Mhm.
haven't found the bones yet, right? That's really what it
Right.
boils down to.
So,
Um,
for example, there were, I think this is it. I'm just trying to find it. Yeah, the Cerruti Mastodon site. This was found in November of 92. They were putting in a freeway expansion and they found some stuff and they found some bones. And so we're talking about mammoth bones they found from 130,000 years ago.
mhm.
And the problem is that the mammoth had been worked. So
Yeah.
somebody had come in and they had taken out a femur. There were stones nearby that had evidence of like flint knapping
Mhm.
for their that, and there was some evidence that they'd worked in some of the rocks, and that one of the tusks had been removed and like stuck in the ground like a flag, sort of, and it had been left like that. It's 130,000 years ago in California. That's somebody's here. We and of course they're like, well, the bones that are broken that you think were broken are actually because of the tractor. I mean, there's a million excuses why somebody will go and look. Apparently the guy looked at the pictures and was like, it's not real, and just disregarded it. And it feels
Actually,
like that's a
I remember reading somewhere that, and I could be wrong, that they dismissed most of the stuff as modern construction material machinery having done the damage and all the stuff, and that was the excuse they used to say it wasn't real.
the yes, and
Like the bulldozer did it. We're done.
right, and the problem is that when a bulldozer runs over an ancient bone, it doesn't spirally crash. There were a couple of
Yeah,
things where it was,
there were some
and it was
experiments done to
also,
see if that could
yeah,
happen, and they didn't match up.
and it sort of sounded like, from my understanding, was the person who refuted it was like, huh, nope, it was the construction equipment, and just read the paper and said they're not right. and that was it. There wasn't any further investigation, as far as I was aware. The other thing I wanted to mention is that just recently, um, a group of scientists were able to find some. They found some cutting tools. They were able to microscopically look at them and find out that there was evidence of people doing fiber work. So like shredding bamboo to make ropes and things like that 34,000 years ago. Now this was in Europe, but again, the most recent evidence we had up till then was about 8 to 9,000 years ago. We just pushed it back, 30,000 years almost. Um, there has been I want to say in the last 5 years, and maybe that's only because I've only been paying attention for the last 5 years, but it feels like there is a growing pile of evidence that the story that we have been telling is wrong. I don't know what the right story is. I think I have a story in my head that I think might be right, but all I know is that story is wrong.
And
Civilization did not start
and
8,000 years ago.
and to be perfectly fair to the archaeologists, because we've been kind of using them as a punching bag, they may have part of the story right,
Absolutely.
because there's nothing to say that we haven't collapsed and restarted multiple times, right? Um, we very well could have been on the way to what we would consider an advanced civilization like Egypt, and a massive drought or plague killed most of the people. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
have genetic information that tells us at some point we got down to like 3,000 humans, right?
Yeah.
And then we regrew back from there.
And
So
that has apparently happened
more than once.
into antiquity, hundreds of that many times where, and it could have may have been Homo habilis or something, but got down to a small, and so that's not uncommon that,
Yeah.
we're the survivors of the survivors.
No, and realistically, historically, the uncommon thing is that we are alone as a hominid.
Mm-hmm.
That is a unique
That's
to this time thing.
it
Most
was
of
it
most
was
of human history, right? And I'm using human to talk about Neanderthal and Homo erectus and all the
hominid
what
history.
I would call advanced hominids with advanced stonework, right? Most of that history was like Tolkien. We had elves and dwarves and all that. And no, I don't mean literal elves and dwarves, but multiple species very similar to each other running around, potentially interbreeding with each other. We know that happened for a fact because I've got Neanderthal DNA from both sides of my family tree.
Mm-hmm.
The 23andMe test showed it on my dad's side, showed it on my mom's side.
Yeah.
So we know that happened. And
Well, and we know there is genetic evidence of a unknown hominid
mhm.
in some, I think it's Australian and Brazilian natives of those two areas. They both
And Asian.
share an unknown, another hominid that
Nope.
existed that
We haven't
that's
found the
mixed in there
bones for
somewhere.
yet. Yeah,
Yeah.
we haven't found the bones, but we found its genetic code, which is fascinating in and of itself. Um, so, who writes the history, and why does it take so long? I think there's a lot of things that go into this.
I mean, I think it takes a long time because schools suck. Because they only buy new textbooks every 5 years, and I mean, and I don't even want to dive into it, but like let's remember how long the debate over whether or not we were going to include evolution in the textbooks was. I mean, that was going on when I was in school. So like, and I don't want to get into it, but like
And
that was and even the dinosaurs, like
I was
how
going to
long
say
it took
another
for us
great
to,
example.
yeah.
When I was young, there were three or four competing theories, and the leading one was not the comet. In fact, the people who proposed the comet were almost laughed out of science.
Mhm.
And now we think they're right. I don't want to say we know they're right
We
because that
actually do know they are correct. There was
well,
a document. Well, hang on, I'll tell you. There was a documentary called "The Last Days of the Dinosaur."
mhm.
It was actually fascinating. What they were able to determine is that they happened to find. I think it was out in the Utah area. they found some dinosaurs and some other stuff, and they were in this one layer, and they found this fish. And inside the gills of the fish, they were able to find microspherules of different things. And
The KT layer. Yeah.
by analyzing those microspherules, they were able to determine that they had particles of the asteroid that hit in the Yucatan. And then they were able to like figure out how long it would have taken the ballistic trajectory to land. And there was something about the water changing. And so they were able to just go like, okay, this fish died when that asteroid hit the planet. And then they went a little bit farther and they found a dinosaur. And they were like, okay. And so what that was, hang on, let me finish. What that was the proof that the dinosaurs were alive when the asteroid hit. So it doesn't fully confirm the asteroid killed them, but they were for sure alive when it hit because they weren't certain of that.
Yeah.
That was a new thing that they were able to finally determine.
And we also have evidence with I think it's the KT layer that they find all over the world. And it's probably, if not true, a massive contributing factor to why, as they were at the time they went extinct. But let's not forget that, a chicken is really a tiny T-Rex, right? In some way, shape, or form. And if you've never seen
chickens, a chicken is a pterodactyl. Well, the land dinosaurs died. It's the avian dinosaurs that survived.
Regardless,
I'm gonna be picky about this. Sorry.
If you've ever watched a land bird hunt or a group of land birds hunt, it freaking looks like Jurassic Park, right?
It does. I see it every time I go to the beach when a big bird flies over and you look down on the ground, like it's the outline of a pterodactyl, and you're like, whoa, that's creepy.
Well, and my parents have between 6 and 12 chickens, depending on the health of the chickens and stuff. And they move around in a pack sometimes, but when you really see it is when you find like a big grasshopper or something and throw it in amongst them, and it's like watching the velociraptors go after somebody from Jurassic Park. I mean, it really is.
Yeah. The velociraptors are actually only like 2.5 feet tall, and they're covered in feathers. They look like big chickens.
They do. They use that name, and there's another dinosaur that they based the body off of that there's a skeleton of at the Houston Museum, which is fascinating.
Well, and the one that killed Nedry with the big thing was way too big. They were supposed to be a lot smaller too.
Yeah, I mean, they took a lot of liberties. That's fine.
I actually saw a thing on Reddit the other day that was a side-by-side of how much we know now, and it was like the T-Rex was quite a bit smaller and the Brontosaurus was a bit bigger, and the Velociraptor and a couple, but it was just sort of like, wow, we've learned a lot in 25 years about what these things were and what they looked like and
just
stuff.
The Brontosaurus. You and I grew up with the Brontosaurus, and it doesn't exist. It never did.
It's a Brachiosaurus.
It's a Brachiosaur. We had the wrong head on the wrong body, and
there were a couple of those early on.
The early one.
Yeah. Hey, I'm gonna sidebar this for 2 seconds because this is interesting. Do you know the tongue twister "Sally Sells She Sells by the Seashore" is actually about a woman named Sally who was one of the first people to find fossils and sell them?
No,
it's actually a real person. I know. I learned that in a dinosaur book. All right, go ahead.
That's fascinating. All of this gets back to a dirty little secret in academia for people who aren't in academia that I think is also part of the problem. There are fiefdoms of ideas that exist, and people's careers and reputations live and die by whether they can hold that intact. And I think that is a problem in academia because I don't think anyone should ever lose their reputation because they proposed an idea and they could defend that idea until new evidence was found. All you need to do at that point is then be able to, if you're following the actual scientific method, incorporate the new data and modify your idea and say, I wasn't wrong. I had insufficient evidence, and now I need to refine my idea.
And I think the reason why that becomes so hard is because when we're looking at archaeology, and I don't want there's a lot of science that is used in archaeology.
Hmm.
There are a lot of tools and things that they do, but in the end, when you're looking at a pot and you're making an assumption, you're applying a philosophy to that and trying to figure out what that means. And I think the problem that we run into with that is that you're you've you've created that thing. Like, I understand that we're taking, you're taking all the information in, but then you're having to formulate that into a full thing, and then you're giving birth to an idea at that point. And then we talk about learning is the little deaths, because it's all about you have to let the old thing die before the new idea can come forth. And I think the problem is that some of these ideas, they're not babies anymore. They're like teenagers and adults. And these people have been nursing these ideas for 20 years. And what they're saying is, you need to shoot it in the head and start over. And people are going, I don't think I can do that.
Yeah.
I don't think I can start over. I don't think I can accept that, you know, eh, that, blue is red now, and that
Hmm.
everything I've ever painted is wrong now, or whatever. It's a bad analogy, but I think
Everything I knew
they're
was wrong.
attached to it. Yeah.
Right.
And
Everything I
and
knew
that,
was
I mean,
wrong.
I remember what that did. I mean, I had no career or education or livelihood tied to that. And I mean, I'm sure you remember the day that I sort of like clicked and was like,
Hmm.
"Oh, it's all wrong.
Yeah,
Like,
you called me and you're like, everything is wrong. And I'm like,
it's
all
all
right, what?
broken."
I
Yeah,
was like, what are we talking about? And
yeah.
and we went into like
And
a 2.5 hour conversation.
it was a shock, and it's a thing that you have to, like, you really do have to go, I have to let it die, and I have to find a new thing.
And
And I just don't think they're willing to let it go.
and to tie back into your religion type thing a little bit, there's a lot of like faith tied into these ideas because there's faith that they're right. And when you find something that challenges that or strikes that, whether it's in archaeology or the study of history in general or biblical studies or whatever, it can be world changing because
Mm-hmm.
what did it for me wasn't archaeology or wasn't a scientific thing. It was when I was in seminary. And there's I'm going to paraphrase, but there's a bit in the Bible where Jesus is baptized. I mean, most people know the story that Jesus goes, John the Baptist puts him in the water and brings him out of the water, and the heavens open, and the Spirit lands on him like a dove. And when I was working with my Greek professor, he's like, "That's not right," and I'm like, "What?" He's like, "That's not the best translation. That's the accepted translation, but it's not the best one." I'm like, and as a class, we're like, what's the right translation? He's like, well, what it should be is the fabric of reality was ripped asunder, and the essence of God slammed into him like a falling pigeon. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's different. That's not a pretty soft, nice, glowy image. That is, Star Trek wormhole opening up and something just falling, diving head first
Mm-hmm.
and hitting him in the chest. Because if you've ever watched a bird dive on anything,
Yeah.
that is not floating down like a pretty dove, right? The heavens open. Well, that seems like the clouds parted, and there's pretty. So that's when I realized,
That's what I
okay,
thought it was.
yeah, that's when I'm like, all right, that's not right. And then another famous one that's interpreted as pacifism. You know, somebody asks Jesus what to do if like a Roman soldier strikes them, hits them on the cheek, and he says, "Well, you should turn the other cheek." And the more accurate translation is, "Well, you should pick yourself up off the ground and walk up to the Roman soldier and stick your face in their face and show them your other cheek."
Hmm.
Civil disobedience,
Yeah.
not pacifism. They're different things, right? Oh, somebody hit me, so I'm going to just forgive them and walk away. That's not a bad idea in general in life, but if someone's pushing you, well,
Yeah.
get back up and walk back up and show them,
Push. Yeah.
not
Push
push
back a little
back,
bit.
but be like, do it again. Go ahead,
Yeah.
do it again. So it comes in a lot of different things and a lot of different ways. And this comes back to we should be okay with asking questions and challenging
And I
ideas and having an open and honest debate.
and I think we're, I'm not even going to dive into politics because we'll do that on another one, but we're seeing that right now in politics and the news, and that people are saying like, I have questions about pick a freaking topic. It
Let's
doesn't
just talk
matter.
about
And it's just,
COVID. Let's
yeah,
just
we
mention
don't,
COVID. When the
we
vaccine
can't
rolled
talk
out,
about it.
when the vaccine first rolled out, if you went, hold on a minute, I've got some questions. The answer was, shut up, put your mask back on,
Yeah.
and take the shot.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And people got deplatformed for disagreeing or asking questions, and
And some of
people
us had to have
who
it to go
said
to work.
things.
You
There,
know,
since we've gone there, I'll say it. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., when the vaccine came out, said, "Hey, I read the papers the published studies. This isn't going to stop transmission."
yeah,
And so they deplatformed him.
yeah,
He was right.
he was right.
So there's something going on where we've decided that we don't want to talk about it anymore. And I think that has been something that has been going on for a long time, because I remember when I was younger, and I don't remember who it was, but somebody was going to have a debate with someone who didn't believe in climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it being, how could you give them a platform to say the crazy things that they're saying? And I remember at the time being a kid, sort of just accepting that and moving on, but sort of feeling like that seems kind of weird, that like, I understand you don't agree with him, but if he's got a bad idea, shouldn't you be able to like show me that?
Yeah,
Like,
and
I think the earth is flat. Well, let me show you how you're wrong. Like, I can prove those two things.
yes,
So what's going on here?
and I can remember a little bit more about the climate change stuff than you can, because I'm just, again, this is that 5-year difference.
It's 5 years.
I remember when I was a kid, it was global cooling is going to kill us all.
Mm-hmm.
Then it became global warming, and I still, and I think the man was spouting out the information he'd been given because he's not a scientist. But I can remember when Al Gore ran for president and was debating Bush, Gore was saying, if we don't make these changes right now, by 2012, we'll be underwater. Florida will be underwater. Houston will be underwater. New York will be underwater. And we don't have a choice. We have to make all these massive, drastic changes right now. And they're not underwater. Now, you and I differ a little bit on climate change in general. And I'm not going to say that humans don't affect the climate. I think we do.
Mm-hmm.
However, climate change happens, period. We know it for a fact, whether we're here or not.
I don't think we do differ on this.
No. But where we differ is how much we're directly impacting.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think.
But we've talked about that before, and I think it's a teeny tiny little bit, and you think it's bigger, which is fair, right? I don't know if it's honestly reasonably measurable. But climate change
about
happens.
that much.
Climate change
how big
happens.
it is. It's about that much.
That much, yeah. And I say it's about that much. If it's this big, it's that much. Yeah. But all of this is moot if
you can't talk about it.
I was going to say, if we have an event, if we have an event like when the volcanoes erupted in India and caused a giant mass extinction before the dinosaurs, right?
Or
but
you can't. But
tomorrow,
again, you can't.
Yellowstone blows and we're all dead anyway, right?
I mean, I remember the volcano went off within the last 3 or 4 years, and they were talking. I don't remember what it was, but it was
Iceland.
like
it was in Iceland.
Okay, but it was spewing enough carbon dioxide to be the same as, it was like 5 years of whatever, and I was just sort of like, why is like if we were really that close to the end, why is everybody not just like losing their mind right now?
Yeah.
Like we just lost 5 years, but nobody seems to really care. Like what's going on here? And then you start, you get into people start asking questions. So I watched a thing where a guy was talking about the climate models that they use. And he was just proposing the question of, why are we not paying more attention to all the things that the sun throws at us? We're only counting one number. There's like 5 things.
Yeah.
Why aren't we looking at all these other ones? And again, I don't know if he's right, but he asked a question. I'm like, it's a fair question. Like,
and that's, I think,
why
the
can't
core
I
of our
ask that?
point, right? That's the core of our point. If it's a fair question,
Right.
why can't we ask it? And you were talking about the volcano, so I just looked up the Krakatoa thing. So Krakatoa destroyed the island in 1883, the equivalent of a 200 megaton bomb, killed 36,000 people, and cooled the entire Earth by 0.6 degrees centigrade.
Yeah.
For like a year. One natural event we had nothing to do with. Well, we haven't been able to cool the Earth by almost a whole degree, as far as I know. I mean, there's things that happen. We're affecting it. And I think humans are more dangerous to the climate in micro than we are in macro. And if you want to talk about climate change and
we've gotten off topic though. We were talking about history.
But I was just going to say,
we'll come back to.
I was going to my last point. If you want to talk about serious damage to climate change, let's have a discussion about monocrop farming and how that destroys the environment, right?
Yeah.
And so we can have a whole show on
we'll
on
do
that.
a whole other thing on that. So we got off, but I still think all of that whole thing is, these are questions that need to be asked. And I think, we go back to the initial question is, who writes the history? And I think the big thing is that it's, the victor writes the history. We've always talked about that, you only get to write the history. We burned all the libraries down. So all the old history is gone, which is why we don't know how the Egyptians built the pyramids. It was probably written down somewhere. Somebody probably knew, and we burned it down and lost it.
And let's just take something as modern as the Coral Castle, right? We know one dude built it, and he didn't write down how, and nobody has a clue how it was done, right? A modern megalithic site in America.
Yeah.
Because he didn't tell anybody and he didn't write it down, but he said he figured out the quote-unquote secrets of the Egyptians. And that's how he did it, with a pulley and a chain and some logs. And he built the whole thing, and it's just mind-blowing. But here's where it gets me, and I guess I'm cynical because I have this attitude. If someone asks a fair question and your response is, you be quiet, you're a kook, I don't have to talk to you, I immediately assume you can't back up your argument.
Yeah.
Or you lose, whether you're right or not, you lose massive credibility with me if you refuse to even talk to the person and have a conversation.
I mean, and the example to that would be Graham Hancock. Recently did this happen. So there's the guy, I can't remember his name, who put out the press release before Netflix came out and said, I'm available to every news organization if you would like me to come and talk about how terrible Graham Hancock is. And I don't even want to get into what he said because it's a bunch of garbage. It was a bunch of lies and slander that I just don't even, it's not even worth repeating. But, and Graham said, all right, you've said you're willing to come on and talk to anybody about how crazy I am, then come on Rogan and we're going to talk about it and we'll do it. And he won't do it. He's scared. He won't come and talk. So he's found someone else, a professional, but he's in the point now where he's going like, look, I have a series of arguments to make the point that I think I'm right. And I need, I was listening to another podcast that he was on, Mile High or something like that. It was interesting. But he said, I want someone who has years of work in archaeology. I want someone who's actively teaching right now and who knows their stuff. I don't want to talk to some amateur guy who's trying to use my name to boost themselves.
So, yeah.
If we're gonna do this, I want to talk to a pro
And
because go ahead.
he's not the only one, because just the other day, and this gets a little bit into politics and stuff again, Joe Rogan put up a massive amount of money if someone would just come on and debate Robert Kennedy Jr. And Rogan's not saying he's right. He just said, look, we'll donate this massive amount of money to charity, and it snowballed.
Yeah.
And the answer is we shouldn't give them the time of day because that legitimizes their opinion. Well, no,
Yeah.
all you've done when you do that is you've taken people who agree with them and given them ammunition to say, well, those people are wrong. They won't even talk to us.
Yeah.
So they're obviously wrong. And we've lost dialogue in this country. We have lost the ability to disagree and talk about why we disagree.
Yeah.
We used to have that, and it's gone. It's gone from politics. It's gone from science. It's gone from, like, neighbors. Families destroyed each other over COVID during the chaos of the 2 years.
Because no one was willing to talk about it. I mean, I had issues with my family. I was following along the narrative of COVID for a while, and then there was a point at which I sort of the dissidence ran out, and I was like, wait a second, hang on, like this is starting to not make sense, and you start to going like, I read that paper, and that's not true, and that was really when I started, and I would say this for anyone, like if you ever read a news article that quotes a scientific paper, read the paper. Go and look at it. If they don't give you the link to the paper, I don't trust the article. If you're not going to reference me to the original thing that you're quoting, I don't want to. I don't even care what your opinion is.
I remember,
but I can't tell you how many times in the last few years since I've really started doing this that I read an article and I read a headline and then I open up the paper and then I read the bill or the scientific paper or whatever it is, and you get to the end and you go, okay, I see how they wrote that, and they're not lying, but boy, are they misrepresenting the point.
Yeah, or distorting the truth,
or distorting the truth, or sometimes blatantly lying. I mean, it's just like that's not what that really said. Like if you read this, it's different.
I remember the minute it clicked for me during COVID, because and I'm only using that because it's the most recent thing. Yeah, specifically around masks. When I was listening to a radio show, and they asked for experts to call in, and somebody called in and said, look, I work in a lab, I deal with viruses, it's part of my job, and unless you're wearing a N95 rated mask, you're not going to be safe from this disease because it doesn't stop it. And people who are wearing face shields with no mask are, that's a joke, because do you think the virus sees the thing and just stops? If you're wearing a cloth mask or anything that's not an N95 fitted mask, it's not doing anything.
Worn correctly. That's another thing. Like apparently there is the correct way to wear an N95 mask.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll take it, since we're on this, just talking about this idea, like the big moment for me, and this sort of falls onto this about questioning, is that people didn't like what Joe Rogan was saying. And I still have people in my life that cannot believe that I would deem to listen to the evil and terrible Joe Rogan. And I've been listening to him since forever.
The early days,
just when he was just getting high with his friends on the radio. It was great.
Yeah.
But, I remember when he had a couple of guys on to sort of talk about some things, and the news was really sort of picking up on his popularity and realizing that they needed to report on what he was saying. And then because I follow him, I saw the tweet where he was like, "Hey, I got COVID and I'm sick and I'm feeling, but I'm better. And I took all this different stuff because my doctor told me to, and I'm doing all right." I was like, "Oh, cool. He'll be back." Because he'd been off. He hadn't been recording because he got sick.
Hmm.
And so I sort of noticed. And then I saw it on the news on CNN. And I went, that's not the same video. They've doctored the video.
They
They've
altered
like
it.
they've made him look sick. And I
Hmm.
was like, hang on a minute, what's going on here? And it suddenly starts to unravel and you go like, oh, everybody's got an agenda. Everybody's got a point to make, and we're just going to bend the information to however it fits us. And so, granted, you could say that to Graham Hancock. You're bending the information to make the point that you want to make. And
Yeah.
of course he is. Everybody does that. Everybody takes the information they have and they apply it to usually
And
to the thing that they think is right. And hang on. And so what we have to do though is take this idea that's using the information this way, and we take this idea that's using the information this way, and we just smash them together until we figure out which one's better. And we're not
yeah,
willing to do that
we're
anymore.
not doing.
We've got these two ideas and we just go, I don't like this one. Well,
Yeah, we've
but it
and
probably has some good points in it.
and it's hurting us. It is absolutely hurting us as a
Yes.
species, as a culture, as a country, because I can't even. So I have someone who I was friends with for years from college, and we got into a discussion about guns and firearms and whether they should be owned. And I was like, and I finally said, look, we're going to have to agree to disagree on this.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't. They wouldn't leave it alone. And
Yeah.
every time it was like, hey, how's it going? It would be like, and you need, and it was an immediate, like, their opinion. Constant, constant, constant to the point where I had to block them. I blocked them on
Mm-hmm.
Facebook. I blocked them on my phone. I told people not to, tell them when I was going to be in town because it was just a constant bombardment.
Yeah.
And we should never get to that point. We should be able to agree to disagree about things. But if we can't have a conversation, we can't talk about a problem.
I think there are levels to this. I think there are some things that you don't talk about, in polite company kind of stuff, where
Yeah,
like you don't need to get into
religion or
politics over
politics.
Thanksgiving
Yeah,
dinner and stuff like that.
yeah.
Those are conversations that you're like, hey, I'm going to engage you in a controversial conversation about politics. Would you like to participate? Yes, I would. Great. And then we
Okay, cool.
yell at each other for 30 minutes and we finish and we go, well, you're a moron, but so am I. Have a great day. We'll talk later. Like that should be how that happens. But what's happened is we've lost the ability to do that, and we've made it so personal. We've attached our identities to our political stances because our political stances have become, and I don't, they've become so tied into wokeness and anti-wokeness
The team, the
and we're
team
sort
you're
of,
on. Yeah.
yeah, it's all sort of
So,
merging
and what you know
together.
what's
And so,
interesting? This thought just popped into my head. Kind of the rise of this inability to have a civil discussion with
mhm.
opposing viewpoints kind of is almost the same timeline as when we stopped letting kids hash it out on the playground.
Mm.
Those two almost parallel each other directly, right? So, as a child, we stopped learning how to settle our disagreements and then still be friends, right? I can do it, but I could also slug somebody on the school playground who called my mom a bad name, and then we were friends an hour later, right?
So,
So,
by not allowing children to deal with their physical aggressions,
or I would say to
hang on,
develop. Okay, go ahead.
hang on, by not allowing them to deal with their physical aggression and anger and emotion, or no, by not allowing them to deal with their emotions physically,
Hmm.
we've stunted their later ability to be able to deal with their emotions rationally.
Yes, and
Maybe. I don't know.
I would say it a little bit differently. I would say by eliminating a child's natural way of dealing with conflict and disagreement and moving past it,
Mm-hmm.
which when they're younger, they tend to fight, right?
Yeah.
Whatever that looks like. We have stunted their ability because we never allowed them to develop the skill set to move past your mom's fat
Mm-hmm.
to, okay, we can still be friends now after we resolve the your mom's fat problem.
Right.
However that's done.
So now when I say I hate your candidate, that's just it.
Yeah,
There's
you're
no.
attacking me and I don't know how to deal with that, and so I'm just
Mm-hmm.
going to lash out at you and we're never going to talk again.
Interesting.
And I don't know if that's right. It could be a correlation, but when you think
Yeah.
about the trends, they match. They're very, very similar.
I mean, and it makes sense that what we're. Yeah.
And at the
Interesting.
basic psychological level, we are trying to teach children adult rational ways of dealing with conflict. They're not there yet. They
Yeah.
haven't developed that. They don't know to sit down and talk it out. They have to fight it out before they can talk it out. And I think that's kind of where we're at.
Right. And so now we're at the point where and so that's where Graham is. Graham has the ability to talk it out, and he wants to talk it out.
He wants to talk
But
it out
the
with
problem
somebody
is
else.
everybody's still fighting. And
Yeah.
I think that's because they know they don't have any ground to stand on. I feel like that's what's
Or
you back
they're
somebody into a
afraid.
corner.
It's fear. It's fear
Mhm.
of legitimizing someone else's idea, so we're not going to talk to them about their idea at all.
Well, let's also just this is not directed at anybody, but if you lose that argument, you're now the guy who lost the history argument. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
imagine it, in the crazy, in the realm of that world of like, okay, you're going to go up against the guy who we've been saying is fucking nuts for 30 years, and he's going to sit down and he's going to ruin you. And now you just have
If
to
he
like,
does, if he wins, you
yeah.
have now lost.
No, but that's the fear.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
The fear.
Yeah, the fear is that if you lose that argument, then Graham Hancock has drawn the sword from the stone and is now king, and you're the guy who lost and let him draw the sword from the stone, right? And that's a King Arthur analogy for anybody who doesn't know what that is. But
the sword in the stone is an ancient sonic weapon that got stuck in the sword, stuck in the rock,
everything's
and couldn't be
vibrations.
pulled out until someone with the right DNA touched the handle and reactivated the weapon because it was the right, ancient bloodline.
No, it was an illusion put there by Merlin, who was actually one of the ancients. Didn't you watch Stargate? Right? I mean.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah. But I think that's kind of a good place to wrap this up for tonight.
Absolutely.
Let's learn to talk to each other. Let's learn to fight and be friends. That's what's missing in life. The ability to have a disagreement and still come back and be like, "You're cool. Let's play D&D together." Right?
Absolutely.
Or let's go watch a ball game, or let's learn to just appreciate the things in other people. And it's okay if we don't agree on everything.
We're going to wrap it up there, everybody. Thank you for hanging out with us. Find us we're on Facebook, and we're on Patreon, and we're on
Twitter,
Spotify, and we're on Twitter.
Oh, yeah. Our Twitter what's our Twitter handle? Because it's a little bit different.
Afraid to Ask.
Yeah.
It's Afraid to Ask. At Afraid to Ask.
And we have a Discord.
We have a Discord if you want to throw anything our way. If you find an article and you're like, hey, guys, talk about this, send it over to us on the Discord.
If you're an expert in something, anything, and you want to talk to us, reach out, right?
Yeah, we'd be happy to have you.
Yeah.
So, we'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.